Hello, everybody. We are about to officially get this party started. This masterclass is about to kick off. Let me make sure that we are also recording. Yes, we are recording. We are going to go to 7 o'clock. If we go a little earlier or a little late, we will go as much as we need this evening. I'm so excited to have Brian Fanzo with me on this masterclass. How are you tonight, Brian?
I am great. Excited to be here. It's going to be a lot of fun.
So much fun. I love this topic, especially because both of us really personally can relate and have built so much of our engagement and traffic thanks to our signature traffic builders. And what we're going to do this evening is really talk about driving traffic and engagement to your brand via a signature traffic builder. And Brian and I are going to get personal. We're going to talk to you about our signature traffic builders, how we got established, the struggles and the heartache that it does take. We all know traffic does not happen overnight. As much as sometimes we would love to snap our fingers and see all that traction, we do have to create that action. So we're about to get into it. I'm going to share my story before we get to Brian. So Brian, up to you if you want to shut your video off, and we're going to get to you in just a few minutes. But I'm so excited for you to be here. Thank you for taking the time to join us live. And I'm going to really kick it off bold here. I'm not usually one to brag, so this slide was really hard for me to even put together, but it's for a reason. It has a purpose. So if you were to go to my website right now, chelseakrost.com, if you were going to go to any of my social channels, you would see nice follower count. You know, Twitter has definitely been my prime social channel. I absolutely have dedicated the most time in building my audience on Twitter. So you'll see the biggest following for me there, over 130,000 followers. That didn't happen overnight. This has been a 7-year journey on Twitter alone. So, and all of this recognition has also been such a journey from 2008 to 2017. I've almost been in this a decade, which is quite crazy. And I'm really proud of the recognition that my brand and my community have received. And that's leading Forbes influencer, rated top LinkedIn millennial marketer to follow. Inc. was so kind, women influencing the new generation of entrepreneurs. I was on that list. 17 magazine voted mini mogul. And of course, coined Twitter chat queen by the Upstart Business Journal, which was very exciting. I have had such a wonderful experience in working with all different affiliates across the country. And that's what you would see now if you came to any of my channels. But that doesn't mean when I started, I had any of this under my belt or I had any of this working for me. So you have to start somewhere. And believe me, even though I have this recognition, although I've built a follower count online, I still catch myself saying these things or asking myself these questions. So you tell me if some of these sound familiar. How do they do it? I should have more followers than that. I should have started my business blog or podcast earlier. I'll never be able to do it. I don't have the budget for it. I don't even know where to begin. And when it comes to traffic and generating engagement, it could seem like a daunting task, right? But the reality is that everyone has to start somewhere. So to get out there now is better than later. And I always say, do something today that you're going to thank yourself tomorrow. And believe me, every day you will make progress taking action on generating engagement and traffic for your brand. You just have to commit to it and also put in the time and the effort. And of course, the creative and passion. So I'd love to take you on a journey back to 2007. And it was a very interesting year for me. I was only 16 years old here in South Florida. If we have anybody joining us from Florida, give it a shout out. But it was 2007, I was a sophomore in high school, and it was truly a time where it seemed like every publication, every news outlet, all of my favorite morning shows, even some of my biggest mentors and idols like Barbara Walters and Diane Sawyer and Oprah and Mark Lauer were talking so negatively about the next generation. And the next generation, aka millennials, didn't even have a term yet. We were teenagers, also known as the demise of the future, entitled, lazy, narcissistic. There was nothing positive pertaining to this generation. It was just such negative chatter. And at 16, back in 2007, think about the landscape. You know, social media was really at its infancy. The iPhone was at its infancy, and the means to connect was just not the reality. You know, you didn't think of using YouTube at the time to connect or share a message. It was really more for funny home videos and cat videos and people having fun on YouTube. So there was no platform for this generation to voice their opinion, come together, learn from industry experts across the world. It was truly such a different time. And during that time, I decided to channel my frustration and do something about it, right? And that's exactly what I mean by get started and just do something about it. And so what I did was I put together a radio talk show treatment, and it started on a yellow spiral notepad and a pencil, this concept. And that radio talk show was to ultimately create the platform that I thought didn't exist for my generation. I wanted to truly create empowering dialogue amongst my peers and to empower the next generation to be such a success, because I believe that millennials are truly a force, and we're only scratching the surface of our impact on the world. I'm starting to see some more participants come in. Welcome if you're just joining in. We're just getting started here, sharing some of my story, and all of this is the foundation of truly how I built my brand, traffic, and engagement. So again, back in 2007, put together a radio talk show treatment called Teen Talk Live, walked up to West Palm Beach into Clear Channel Studios. Of course, I had a meeting established, and I had a meeting with the vice president of the station. The vice president and I sat down in a very intimidating conference room, and he said, "All right, go." That was literally it. "All right, go." And I sat there with my little 16-year-old self with my yellow spiral notepad and pitched him the concept of Teen Talk Live. And I kid you not, all I saw was this. It was the most intense poker face I've ever seen in my life. Even 10 years later, most intimidating poker face I have ever experienced in a pitch. And lo and behold, just a few minutes after my pitch, he got up and left the room. I thought that was it. That was my one shot. I ruined it. That was my chance. But after 10 minutes of sitting in that conference room, not knowing if I should stay or leave, the president of the station walked back into the conference room and said, "Chelsea, here's a contract. I want to help you start your career." And 3 months later was the first live Teen Talk Live show. And truly, when I started Teen Talk Live, I never in a million years could have imagined the way that my career would have grown over the next decade. I truly started out of passion and the purpose of wanting to create a platform for my generation. And I think the reality of only coming from a passion and goal-oriented place, and not necessarily with the super drive of monetizing, that passion led to profit. And truly, Teen Talk Live was the foundation to my career that I was able to then layer onto. As the show gained in popularity, grew in popularity, and I also realized that not only millennials were tuning in, we had just as many Gen Xers and baby boomers turning into Teen Talk Live, because guess what? They wanted to understand this misunderstood generation as well. They wanted to know how to market to this generation, understand the mindset of this generation, or they were parents or grandparents looking to really understand their digital native children that seemed just so different than they did growing up. So I always say that there's going to be somebody in your life that opens an opportunity, or that somebody in your life that brings you a bigger purpose. And I'm happy to share this image of me and Christine Uizu, who I call my African angel. I interviewed her on Teen Talk Live back in 2008. And she taught me the reality of women in Africa and the lack of feminine hygiene care products that they had. And that ripple effect was that so many women weren't able to go to school, they would miss so much school, within the year that they would get held back or they wouldn't be able to graduate. And in Africa, if you don't have a degree, then you really can't get a job. So the fact that feminine hygiene product had such a ripple effect on the success of a woman in Africa was mind-boggling to me. And I decided to do something about that as well, take action. So my summer 2009, when I graduated high school, I put together my first mission trip to Africa on behalf of feminine hygiene care. Now I would think to pull up Twitter and tweet at Kotex or Pearl or whatever sanitary hygiene product to try to see if they would sponsor the trip. But back in the day, that wasn't an option. So my mom and I just picked up the phone and started calling anybody and talking to anybody that would hear our story. And lo and behold, Kotex loved our mission, loved our purpose, and gave us hundreds of thousands of sanitary hygiene products to bring with us on our mission trip to Africa. I brought sanitary hygiene products into the slums of Nairobi, Kenya, AIDS orphanages, children's orphanages. And when I handed these women these sanitary hygiene products, you would have thought that I was handing them $100 bills. And it's because they knew what that meant for their opportunity to stay in school and ultimately get a job and provide for their family. When I got back from Africa, I had brought along a CBS and Fox camera with me and documented the entire journey. My brother happened to be my cameraman throughout my entire mission. We're a very family show here. And CBS and Fox aired the docuseries of us documenting our journey in Africa. And a few months later, Kotex called me and asked if I would be their first ever You by Kotex Millennial spokesperson. And You by Kotex was their new brand that they were in creation on, that was going to be marketed to the Millennial Consumer Group. And it was really a very first for this major Fortune 500 company, this big enterprise company, to tap an everyday person to be an advocate or a brand ambassador or a spokesperson on behalf of their brand. You know, think about it. Everything at that time was Selena Gomez or Demi Lovato. So Chelsea Krost, who was I, this little girl with a radio show with just starting my following. And it was truly the beginning of influencer marketing. That 1-year agreement of being their millennial spokesperson allowed me to have my hands in the creation of the product, the marketing of the product, the digital community, and speaking across the country to young women about feminine hygiene care, as well as, of course, being on the media tour for the brand messaging. And that's when I realized that there was this really big shift that the Millennial Consumer Group was creating. And it was this digital shift, it was this social shift, and it was this peer-to-peer influence shift that we wanted to hear from people that we could really relate to. And I realized that I was truly becoming the bridge between business looking to understand the mindset of this new consumer group and the millennial generation. So the foundation of my Teen Talk Live local AM radio show was the foundation that allowed me to continue to layer on top of it to ultimately 10 years later, still be here, sustained, scale, and monetize in so many different ways, thanks to the digital landscape and to social media. And I have to say that one of the biggest reasons why I was able to sustain and scale was because of the strategic signature traffic builders that I incorporated into my brand. And in order to sustain, scale, and generate revenue, what we have to do today is truly think about how we're going to generate audience traffic and engagement. And we cannot sit back and think that just because we believe this video is so great, or just because we believe that this blog post is going to rock people's world, that traffic is just going to come to it. We have to give our audience, we have to give our target market a reason to want to engage, a reason to flock. We have to be the magnet that pulls the traffic to visit our website, our social media channels, to comment on our content, to share and retweet and favorite our content, and of course, to come back consistently. And those signature traffic builders that I implemented, and here's a little snapshot of some of the traffic builders that exist in the world today. Those traffic builders truly is what allowed me to scale my audience, my influence, and my reach over the past decade. And it all started with this local AM radio show. Look at how young I look in that picture. And then my second signature traffic builder was my book at 19. It was really growing my blog on chelseakrost.com. We have over 200 amazing guest bloggers on chelseakrost.com. If you're interested in trying to share or syndicate some of your blog content, your articles, you're looking to generate some traffic your way. It's also strategic to post content on other people's channels so that you start to tap into other people's target markets, hitting some different demographics, ultimately spreading brand awareness on yourself. So if you're interested in that, pop me a note. So you could pop me a note, chelseakrost.com, in my contact, or you could pop a note in my chat. We welcome guest bloggers all the time. And once you email me, I could tell you what that process looks like. And of course, media and television. Television is really my first love, although I love the digital landscape. I really love broadcast. I love being in a studio. I just love the energy that it creates. I really used broadcast as a way to build my credibility at such a young age to appeal to the baby boomer and Gen Xer to ultimately have them hire me or want to work with me, because the baby boomer and Gen Xer 5-6 years ago really wasn't turning to Twitter to see who the influencers were. They were still tuning into traditional media, which was broadcast. And let me tell you, broadcast did not just come to me, and broadcast did not come easy. I would pitch and pitch and pitch and send speaking points after speaking points after topics. I would even fly to, New York or to California or wherever the media hit would be just to get some media under my belt. Again, because you have to start somewhere. And if you are currently looking to really kind of kickstart your broadcast debut, if you want to start becoming like a featured expert or a topic correspondent on all these different news stations or channels or morning shows, once you get that first piece of press under your belt, it's always easier to leverage additional press. That first broadcast hit is always going to be the most challenging. And broadcast and, those signature traffic builders that I started to generate momentum and also utilize all the different channels, some traditional, some broadcast, some print. If you look at that, look, local AM radio, print, book, digital blog, and broadcast. I had that all going on, and I wanted to make sure that I was using all of those channels to, again, spread brand awareness and spread authority and build credibility and authority on behalf of what I had to say amongst this generation. That authority then allowed me to layer on top of that foundation and start speaking all over the country and also internationally. And also, that didn't mean that I got paid right away either. I really paid my dues on the speaker circuit. I think it took me about 3 years before I generated any revenue for speaking. And a lot of speaking inquiries, it's more rare to immediately get compensated for a speaking event, but the more you have under your belt, the more value and experience you will gain, and the more you will be able to position yourself for speakers compensation. So I went from 6 years ago speaking for free to, in 17, being the youngest speaker on the 10X GrowthCon stage with Grant Cardone. So I tell you this story because a lot of people might think that it was a quick fix, or that I became an overnight sensation, or that, no. I paid my dues. I layered on top of my foundation. I honed my craft. I continued to educate myself and crowdsource amongst my millennial peers. And I continued to layer on top of that foundation of Teen Talk Live to further broaden my bandwidth, further generate traffic, further bring engagement to my brand presence. And one of the smartest things I ever did within my brand, and I have to give kudos to my social media manager at the time, 6 years ago, Dee Dee Watson, if she's on here. Hey, Dee Dee, absolutely love you and so appreciate you for saying, you know what, Chelsea, I think you should really start doing a Twitter chat. And 5 years ago was the very first Millennial Talk Twitter chat. If you've participated in Millennial Talk, raise your hand, let me know. Oh, I just skipped ahead here. And the very first Millennial Talk Twitter chat generated 18 million organic impressions. And I literally said to myself, oh my gosh, that is such a massive amount of impressions. Is that a fluke, or is this going to be like something I can really sustain here? And we only went up from there. Now we generate on average between 30 and 40 million organic impressions from our Millennial Talk Twitter chat. And this is with no ad budget, no boosting posts, no promoted posts. This is real quality engagement because of the loyal audience that I grew for 5-6 years before I rolled out the signature traffic builder, Millennial Talk. So I wanted to kind of give you a nice little overview of the foundation of Team Talk Live to where I am today. For those of you who might not have known the journey over my personal past 10 years, but truly because of the strategic signature traffic builders that I was able to implement and the timing of them as I was always watching market trends, I am where I am today, and I am who I am today because it, and my community is so incredible because of it as well. And that leads me to another incredible human being. Brian, if you're with us, you could definitely pop back on video. If you don't know Brian Fanzo, then you're gonna love him, I'm sure, just as much as I do by the end of our masterclass together. I think you're okay. Let me unmute you. All right, there you are, Brian. It is so exciting to have you. Brian is always busy, everywhere and anywhere. The fact that I was able to wrangle him down for this masterclass is so exciting. If you don't know Brian, let me tell you a little bit about my friend here. It's so funny, Brian. I saw you posted a picture from us at IBM earlier on Twitter. I was like, oh my God, I have to get that. But a little bit about Brian real quick. Brian Fanzo talks fast and truly tweets faster. He's a proud pager-wearing millennial. He is a keynote speaker and founder, CEO of iSocialFans, a social strategy consulting agency. Brian also co-hosts Smack Talk podcast and FOMO Fans podcast. Brian's hashtag Think Like a Fan philosophy has powered first-of-their-kind storytelling campaigns for many Fortune 50 enterprise companies leveraging Periscope, Snapchat, and Facebook Live. He was awarded the top 25 social business leader of 2014 by the Economist Intelligence Unit and was nominated for the first ever Shorty Awards Periscoper of the Year in 2016. In 2016, Brian keynoted in 11 countries at more than 40 events, highlighting his passion for change, collaboration, and community. Dubbed the 3 C's, these elements are the foundation of his first book, A Millennial Mindset, due in 2017. So without further ado, I feel like that made me warm reading that, Brian. Welcome to our masterclass this evening.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love it too. We are like exactly 10 years apart as millennials, right? So like you're telling the story at 16, at 26, that same year, I went to Iraq the first time working as a government contractor and talking about like a way that our worlds kind of collide. But I loved hearing your story. I was actually posting on Facebook Live, like your story and elements of that. Not only it continues to inspire me today, and I've known you for a long while now, but I think the gist of investing in the community beforehand, knowing that your goal was, kind of amplifying, and you had a passion to start with. I'm excited to be here because I think so many people, like you said, look at things as overnight success, or they look and say, why do they have what I want? Right. And I think putting in the hard work, I ran 2 Twitter chats for 3 years for one, 2 years for another. And I don't think there's anything harder when it comes to consistency and, continuing, you grow that because of your dedication to your community. There's not a direct ROI, and the fact that you've done that, and, I'm excited to be here, excited to partake in this conversation as well as, team up with anything you have going on.
And you just radiate positivity. And I also love that you are a realist. And I, pride myself on being a realist too, because I don't like to sugarcoat anything. I am really super blunt on client calls because look, I'm not here to like beat around the bush. I want to get you results, right?
Yep.
And sometimes the whole gray area isn't going to work. It's got to be sometimes black or white. And the reality is that generating organic traffic is hard. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize the commitment or the time period that it's going to take to generate the traffic of the quality that everybody ultimately wants. And that's why I wanted to paint that picture of the foundation that you have to establish to layer off of to continue to grow, scale, and sustain that community. And Brian, tell us a little bit about your foundation here. I mean, the awesome thing about you is that you were able to really take a lot of your work experience before iSocialFans, Brian Fanzo, and parlay that into a lot of your signature traffic builders.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of it had to do with what you said as well. It's funny, all those things that you were talking about, you weren't talking about, impressions and a lot of things that I think social media was let's say a monetization side. It was built on vanity metrics. I like to say rainbows and unicorns. Like literally people were selling, like, hey, I'll get this. And they treated it kind of like a billboard. And I always remind people, like, people pay a lot of money to put a billboard on the side of the road, yet there's no proof anywhere on a billboard equaling some direct sale, in a local building or in a local, but yet for the longest time, we treated social media kind of like a billboard where if you just blasted people with stuff or you ran ads or, all of these things, but yet the hard part about organic reach is that A, it's tangible, and B, when you're measuring it, it's something that grows over time. But, really getting, I think the difference when you look at influencers and why influencer marketing is so big today is because you not only want to get organic traffic, but to get the right traffic, to get the people that actually want to consume your content and take action, it does take a lot of work. And so for me, I introduced myself on stage as a change evangelist because I had 9 years Department of Defense, 3 trips to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan. I traveled around the world deploying and managing cybersecurity solutions. And really my job was helping to get different military branches to collaborate together. So when someone tells me, I can't get millennials to collaborate with Gen X or baby boomers with Gen Z, I always tell them, like, my job was the Army to share with the Navy and the Marine Corps to share with the Air Force. So I had the harder job of getting, kind of people to collaborate. But the interesting thing for what I kind of realized was my strong suit was kind of translating the geek speak between where technology lives and how things go on and real life actionable takeaways and actionable work. And it's also why I think 2 of us hit off, immediately was that we're not doing and using social media just for social media's sake, right? We like to, build a community that ultimately is doing something. And oftentimes it's just showing up back at a Twitter chat every week, right? Like there wasn't a call to action at every single chat. I mean, I remember early on, joining Millennial Talk at early days, and, getting guests is also something that's hard, and, making those asks. And oftentimes I think what people forget is all of that stuff, all of that rapport you build up, all of that consistency. That's where, when you said, like, the brands are starting to come around, the paid speaking gigs, like you, I actually spoke for my brand for free, not even realizing I actually closed Amazon's AWS reInvent Summit a couple of years ago. Look at that. The lights falling down. That was good. Nice catch.
This happens when you try to do too many things at one time, but we're working with it.
We're good. But I actually closed, opposite of Steve Wozniak, AWS reInvent in 2012. And at the time, it was a speaking spot that my brand got me. I had no idea that I'm speaking in front of 12,000 people. It was this great, and I had fun. I had a great time, but I didn't take a video. I didn't take a picture. I didn't even tweet about it. Like, for me at the time, it was a different world. And then I kind of jumped into the entrepreneur space. And although I was able to leverage that brand, I did kind of start back over at scratch, right? And I couldn't even get on the side stage of the side stage at Social Media Marketing World the first year. When I pitched them, they're like, no, you're not really going to make this work. And I was like, I just closed a keynote with Steve Wozniak at 13,000. But for what they kind of look at and how this whole thing kind of comes together, I think a lot of people realize that to build a community, it's extremely hard, but the residual income and residual reach, the reason people show up to a Twitter chat, the reason they support you when you're doing things, the reason you're getting asked to do things is that long, tail of work prior to. And it's the same thing for me. I think it's why, for us, when we're working at building traffic, and the reason we have different shows and different content going on is because we want to reach people where they are at, but we don't want them just to do one thing for us. We want them to get to know us, so they follow us, and then they continue to come back. And I think that's the true magic of organic reach and really getting people to really generate true traffic today.
Yeah, and you know what? And this is why I put this slide in here. Before, I'm going to skip that. We're going to come back to that. But this is why I put this slide in here, because I wanted to really paint the picture of how hard it is to grow a following, which ultimately is going to lead to traffic and engagement. So look at all of the crazy amount of users each platform has. I mean, it is insane how many, billions of users all over social media. But the reality of the organic reach on some of these channels have become incredibly difficult. And I'm sure we can have a whole masterclass about the, Facebook algorithm here.
Right.
But the organic reach, unfortunately, on Facebook has continued to decline. And a study from the EdGark Checker study, which is a very random study, but they had a lot of great content within this report. And it was also 2017 statistics. It's very hard to always find the most up-to-date statistics, especially. Like you go to all these different resources and it's all these different.
All over the place.
Yes. So, between February 2012 and March 2014, organic reach for the average Facebook page dropped significantly, 16% to 6.5%. And after the 2016 new Facebook algorithm, users were warned that pages could anticipate an additional dip in organic reach. Because you are the awesome geek that you are, Brian, can you give everybody a little understanding of the Facebook algorithm and why it's really had such an impact on traffic for those of us who are still a little cloudy?
So if you think about it, in the early 2013, 2014, when a page posted, much like a personal account posted, everyone who followed that got that in their news feed. The problem became our news feed was filled of brands that realized that it was better than ad dollars, it was better, and they would start posting 10 times, 12 times, 18 times a day, when all of a sudden the news feed became the greatest thing that any brand had ever seen in marketing. And the problem became Facebook users started to be like, well, I don't see any of my friends. I don't see any of the people that I come, let's face it, very few people log on to Facebook and say, what is a favorite brand talking about, right? Like, that's not what we think. And what Facebook figured out was, okay, we can't make sure every post reaches every person, but we need to kind of put some kind of algorithm that gives and rewards certain content. But let's also face it, Facebook cares about people being on their site a long time. So before, you used to post a YouTube link and it got the same love as a Facebook video. Well, now Facebook realized if someone clicks on the YouTube link, they're now getting YouTube ad dollars, where if they watch a Facebook video, they're staying in Facebook ad dollars. And it's the reason, I always use a hashtag in Zuck I trust, where in Mark Zuckerberg I trust. The guy, he knows what he's doing. He has a true pulse of what's going on. He's embracing live video with Facebook Live. He has a big VR, AR play. He's doing a lot of humanitarian things, but a lot of what his goal has always been was, how do you make Facebook as close to a real world offline 3D networking event as humanly possible, right? And the crazy thing about this is in 2011, one of my jobs was to actually enable Facebook for the ranking military officers in Iraq, because they were getting deployed for a third time in a row, not going home. And one of their demands was, I just want to be able to keep track of my granddaughter. Would you mind if and we ended up opening Facebook. They couldn't post to Facebook, but they could consume Facebook. And so if you put your head around that, Facebook is that much of our world, that much of our ecosystem, that Facebook started to figure out how these algorithms and things work. And so today, like Facebook Live video, when you go live, about 18% of your audience gets a notification, right? Which is still, it's much more than the 6% when you post normally, but it's still only 18%, right? I've launched a couple big Facebook Live accounts for multi-million page followers, and they're like, Brian, why is no one coming to watch this? And I was like, well, you have 9 million Facebook friends or Facebook followers, but you only have 1,000 that engage on a post every month. So you're really only getting 18% of that 1,000, not 18% of your 9 million, right? And so to me, this all comes down to, organic reach in its truest sense is Facebook is about people that know you, that like you, that trust you, that have decided to like your page and continue to like your content. I mean, one of the things I preach all the time is there is nothing worse than someone unfollowing, unfriending, unsubscribing, right? And I think we often talk about where we want to gain new followers. I challenge everybody, respect your current following so much that you don't force them to unfollow. And that could be posting too much, even posting too little, right? You kind of disappear out of sight, out of mind. And so Facebook is still testing with it. I sometimes joke that there's like a monkey in the back of Facebook kind of just like, I give that post more rank and I give this post more. It's kind of confusing, but I think the people that get it is that if you create content of value that people want to consume, that people will actually engage with, the reach of that goes up. Their goal was to kind of eliminate people posting for just posting's sake.
Yeah, and you know what? That's the hardest part to wrap your head around. You could have 100,000 followers, but still have such minimal engagement. But then it's also very hard to generate a follower count at the same time. And I love your point about relish the fans and the followers that you have built, even if it's 200 of them. There is such a rise in the micro influencer community. I think 2018 is going to be the year of micro influencer communities. Mega influencers are kind of out unless you have lots of money to drop on them. And the power of the micro community is real because those 200 fans are so loyal and so dedicated that they could generate more engagement and ultimately more impressions than someone with 50,000 followers and really, a fraction of those people are engaging. I mean, I didn't know the median Twitter follower count. I was trying to find it for like every channel, very hard to come across. But the average Twitter follower account, is only 700 followers. And to me, 700 followers that are engaged could really still make an impact. The average number of users, followers on Instagram, 500, 800. Pinterest, 200 to 500. So all of us that sometimes are so concerned with our follower count, maybe take a step back, take a breather, because this is the average. Obviously, people, who wants to be average? Nobody, right? But it's a good thing to compare to because I think social media also is such a distortion of reality. We only see the present. We haven't seen the build. We haven't seen the growth journey. And on social media, we only see what everybody is promoting or proud of, or the awesome vacation they're on. They're not showing all the the crappy moments of their life. So it's everybody has to have that lens associated with social media of you don't know what's going on behind closed doors, and it didn't for anybody except for the crazy YouTube sensations, which is like a fraction of the population, is going to have that real big impact overnight.
Yeah, and I think something else to remember on that too for people, I think times have changed, right? I mean, I think if you think about it, even for us, I think when you and I first connected, there was if you wanted to be an influencer, you needed numbers, right? Yes. People, because the brands, we worked with IBM in 2015 at South by Southwest. And a lot of what we were getting measured on was total potential eyeballs you could get reached on. And I don't blame anybody for doing it that way. I don't even blame people for like kind of looking at influencer numbers in that manner, but times have changed. We can now actually tangibly prove that you have influence. We can tangibly prove when you show something, people actually react. And I always remind people, influence does not mean you have a bunch of people following you. Influence means people trust you to the point they take action based on your advice. And that is a huge different thing. And to your point, 200 people where you have 50% of them that'll take action on your voice will be better than 8 million followers with 200 people that take action for their voice. And I think it's a shift in complete time frame. And I created a new Instagram account a couple months ago, and I did it for a couple different reasons. It's a speaker account, but it was part of that reason was I wonder what it's like growing an Instagram account in 2017 compared to when I started mine in 2012, where, I mean, majority of my following are Pittsburgh sports fans, because for 4 years, I didn't post anything social media in that space until I started realizing, wow, I really like Instagram. And I started, and so I think it's one of those things for a lot of people out there. Yes, there's people that would preach things. You can read books on how value your following is, and you need to grow all these numbers, but they're not wrong. They weren't wrong doing that during the times, just times have changed. Micro influence is important. Brands no longer want a billboard. They want a trusted resource that can actually, get to an audience they can't get to, or maybe get to an audience with more value trust, which I think is what, ultimately you and I have always preached and sold was, we have a community that trusts us. Therefore, if the brands that we align ourselves with, because we choose that, those brands would then it's a pass through of trust. And I warn everybody all the time, 200 followers, 200,000 followers. If you lose that trust, it's over, right? Again, it's game over. So rather than worrying about getting the 200,000 followers, worry about maintaining trust and that organic reach, which is why I love the topic when you reached out to me for this one.
Yeah, and you know what? The engagement portion of that comment really goes to the signature traffic builders, because how do you, a billboard messaging, just posting a tweet, just posting a press release, just posting a white paper report, those aren't going to generate that engagement. That's truly what's shifting the needle today. And that's where, a signature traffic builder really comes into play. And we've both been through this journey in building our signature traffic builders. And I wanted to give a little shout out to what you've been able to accomplish. I mean, in 2014, you became the co-host of Smack Talk podcast. But from 2014 to now, over 1,800 live streams. And then in 2016, host of FOMO Fans podcast. And you're generating 20K monthly podcast downloads. That is so awesome, and a dream come true for most of us who are looking to be in the podcast space or in it. So, and of course, over 80 plus keynote speeches and a stellar following. So I really want to get into, how did you do it? Because that's what everybody wants to accomplish. That's what everybody wants to know. And to put it out there, there is no one size fits all formula.
Correct.
This is the true definition of you getting to know your audience and community so that you can provide the value that keeps them coming back and engaging and continuing to grow your follower count. So, Brian, I'd love to walk through this exercise with you so people can understand the mindset behind a successful podcast, a successful signature traffic builder. And for everybody watching, this is an awesome exercise for you to do with yourself, with your team, with whoever is in your circle that you are looking to scale traffic and engagement with. So take us through the thought process of this to ultimately paint the picture of how you got to podcasting, one, because you picked that signature traffic builder, and then ultimately your Smack Talk and FOMO Fans, how that came into play.
So, I remember it. So November 2013, I remember it as clear as day. As early in 2013, I won a couple of awards that were about social business and collaboration. I really was looking at entrepreneurship at that point, thinking like, hey, this is what I want to do. But in November of 2013, I had like this overwhelming, I'd say pressure. Let's put pressure that, I needed to blog. I needed to create content. I needed to do all of these things. And at the time, I hated social media. I hated creating content. I had less than 2,000 followers on Twitter. I enjoyed social, but I wasn't thinking of it as something that I loved to do because it wasn't me. I would spend hours thinking about what should I tweet that other people would want, or what content should I create, and how do I be like Gary Vaynerchuk, or what is Grant Cardone doing, or all of these things. And in November, it wasn't an epiphany. It was one of these things where I was reading Jab, 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 Right Hook by Gary Vaynerchuk and Utility by Jay Baer, and I was reading them the same month. One was hardback, one was typical millennial, one hardback, one on an iPad. And this light bulb went off and was like, the parts I love about social were my Pittsburgh sports side, because I would go to these sporting events, people that I had never met, but I had talked to on social for years about Pittsburgh sports. We would give big hugs and we'd be like, all of a sudden everything was great. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to be that exact person offline as I am online. And that was, it was one of those things where I'm like, screw it. I'm just going to be exactly who I am. Now, that there's a difference I always tell people between transparency and oversharing, right? Mm-hmm. Transparency is strategically give people a window into who you are and allowing them to decide if they should trust you or not, right? It drives me crazy. I actually heard it yesterday at the Adobe event. One of the people on stage said, transparency equals trust. And I was like, no, it does not equal trust. It gives people the opportunity to decide if you're trustworthy or not. Because if you're transparent and you're a piece of crap, they transparently see that and they don't trust you, right? Like, I mean, there's a misconception there. But for me, the light bulb went off, but I didn't have a website in 2013. I didn't have a place to send people. I mean, almost all of my mentions from 2010 to 2013 were sending people to my Twitter account, right? And like, this was a different piece. And I will tell you that early part of like launching a blog, and I read all these posts. You need to create 2 blog posts a week or 3 blog posts a week. And you need to write. Well, I hate writing. Like writing to me, I was never a grammar person. Yeah, it's something I struggled with. And I loved listening to podcasts. And finally, it was this moment where I was like, I'm telling everybody, like, one day I'm going to host a podcast. And I was on the phone with my business partner at the time, Daniel Newman, who's my co-host on Smack Talk. And I was like, Daniel, one day I'm going to host a podcast and we should do it together. And he's like, how about next Wednesday? And I was like, I think that's a great idea. And Smack Talk was literally born on like a whim of, and I realized at the time where, and this is something I try to tell everybody today, and if you could take something away from me today, it's part of it is create content where you're most comfortable first. I attempted to create content where everybody told me my audience was. But I never got into a workflow, and content was overwhelming. It was such a grind. And all of a sudden, podcasting was my favorite thing. Like my mom jokes, I came out of the womb talking, right? Like talking to me is easy. Like this is the part that I do the best. And all the podcast, it really fell in my lap. And much like you had talked about on your story when you were sharing earlier, we didn't do it to monetize. We didn't do it. Ultimately, what we thought, first of all, was, hey, it gives us both because my business partner and I were like, he lives in Chicago, I live in DC, and it was like, well, we need a reason to like create content together. And I was like, well, a podcast requires consistency. You have to do it every single week. And we're like, okay, let's just do that. So, we launched the podcast, we started creating it every week, and our numbers were, I remember celebrating our first month that we got 1,000 downloads, right? And it was valuable to us. And the interesting thing is, we didn't build it with any kind of sponsorship plan. We didn't build it like any other podcast. And the reason it's called Smack Talk, which stands for Social, Mobile, Analytics, and Cloud, is I was at a conference and someone told me you have to have a niche to start a podcast. And when everyone tells me to zig, I zag. And so they said, you have to have a niche. And I was like, I'm going to launch a podcast that has 0 niche. Like it's about everything in technology that is possible. And they were probably right, because if I had a niche, it would have grown faster. But if it had a niche, it wouldn't have been me. It wouldn't have been what we love to talk about. And so the original concept was, okay, this will give us a way to create content. It'll give us kind of a wheel starting. And we hit the year mark, and we actually paused it for 3 months. And that was a huge mistake. We lost a lot of our subscribers and a lot of things. But we paused it, and we realized 3 months later that we missed that key piece. And the success story of that is 4 years later, we have a very niche audience, but it's been sponsored by IBM, SAP, Capgemini, Avnet. Right now it's sponsored by Adobe and Qualcomm. The sponsorships came to us 4 years down the road of creating a consistent piece of podcast content. But the real true perspective was, I know that content's powerful, but if I had not started with a podcast as my first vehicle, I would probably still be over worrying about blog, because I still worry about blog post content, but I crank it out now a little bit more, I'd say on rhythm, but it's because I finally, and that's why like the hashtag I'm using all the time now is press the damn button. Just press the button, right? My business partner said, let's just start it on Wednesday. We started on Wednesday, right? And yes, you should have a strategy. Yes, you should understand, but ultimately, if you're not willing to press the button, you'll never get started. I think that scares most people.
Yeah. And you know what, that goes to my whole, like second slide of like, you gotta start somewhere. Yep. And you gotta just do it. And I think, and I'm totally guilty of this, of overthinking everything. and making something way more complex than it needs to be. And a lot of the time, you know, what your audience sees and what you know, they don't know that you didn't put that slide in, or you know, so you got to start somewhere. And I think also one of the beautiful things about starting is it's all an experiment. I mean, now it's still an experiment, but especially in the beginning, you're really testing the waters. You're testing what's working, what's not working, what your demographics, what your target market's liking, what's it's not liking. Your unique perspective was not necessarily tailoring one niche. You're like, I'm going to talk about it all in technology. Did you see, you know, the demographics? Because obviously, you know, I guess the stereotype would be it skews more male, it skews maybe a little bit more like, you know, the coders of the world. But now look at how technology is implemented into all of our lives. You should see the amount of technology I have around me just to make this masterclass happen. I mean, it's technology has, right? So how did you if we can get into some of the, you know, your tips from what you've learned from the success of both of your podcasts, is how do you really not get deterred by the slow momentum? And ultimately it could be slow, but how do you validate that it's working enough for you to keep continuing to put in the time, the energy, the creative?
So I think the most important piece is defining success early on, what success looks like, right? For you. And I think that's a big misconception. Like, success is, I want to be on the first page of iTunes. Like, that's ridiculous, right? Like that would be a great to have for me. But ultimately I define success with that podcast, Smack Talking, which is a perfect way of how I defined it, completely different from my second podcast. My first one was, I want to prove that I can do it. I want to prove to myself that I can be consistent, right? Like there's a lot of things in what we're doing oftentimes that people assume success has to be outward facing, and like, you know, I want to reach this many people. For me, it was one of those things where if I know I can get this groundswell going and I can start this, then it can lead into other things, right? And I'm a big analytics guy, and podcasting sucks for analytics as a whole. Like it's hard to understand where people come from and exact demographics and those things. But one of the other pieces for me was, how do you know who you can reach unless you're trying it out, right? Like, live video fell in my lap. Most people know me through live video, and I've done so many live videos. But I actually told this morning on a masterclass I was doing with Brian Kramer, and I told the story that the funny part was before I did my very first Meerkat, so March of 2014, I had 8 total videos on my YouTube channel. 8. Like, wow. Literally 8. I loved video. I did the Social Business Hour show with Rachel. It was a Twitter chat and a Google Hangout. We had all of those videos, but I only had 8 individual videos on my channel. And the reason was video was overwhelming to me. Video, you had SEO stuff, and you had and I knew, like Twitter was where I put the majority of my focus. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, like if I look at how I kind of built things along, was I realized when live video came, it was fun for me. It was easy for me. And like you said, it's trying it all out. Like if anybody tells you they know the exact secret for organic reach, the exact secret for building a community in digital, they're full of crap. Like, I don't believe anybody that pitches that. It's all about, and that's why I liked us kind of talking about our story, because this is what worked for us. Learn from it, figure out where you can kind of tweak it for you. And the second piece of that was in 2016. So 2014, we launched Smack Talk. Podcast was great, but it didn't have huge numbers. But also, if you put it in perspective, I had 4,000 followers on Twitter, then less than 10,000 total in social. Well, in end of 2016, I was pushing over 250,000 in social. And I was like, well, you know what? What would happen if I launched my own solo podcast? But I also said, okay, what does success look like for me? And success was, I'm everywhere and on every channel, but I know I overwhelm a lot of people. And so I said, I want to give one place for every person. If they say, Brian, I just want to follow you, what you're doing, where's one place I can go? I want that to be content that is as most me as possible. And that was this new podcast. And so I said, tune into FOMO fans. It's not going to be structured like any other podcast. And my goal was to cure your fear of missing out. So I talk about, and it's just me. I don't interview now. I am adjusting the format a little bit right now. So we will be interviewing more people, but the idea for that one, and the reason I really focus on success more so than anything, and I love you have some podcast stats, is I define success with this new podcast was how many people can I reach that say, I've never heard of Brian Fanzo, I have no idea what an iSocial Fans is, but I like his content. And so that podcast, my goal was to reach a brand new audience. And I can tell you, 8 of my paid speaking gigs this year directly tied to my FOMO Fans podcast of people that had never followed me on another channel, discovered my podcast, and then fell in love with my content and my vision. And that was all by going through a different vehicle, right? And I think you kind of have to figure that out as you go. But podcasting, it's much like a lot of these other channels. It's a crawl, walk, run mentality. But even those that already, like the John Lee, I'm really good friends with a lot of people that are Pat Flynn, the people that have their podcast. And I look up to them, but I don't measure my success against them because they're doing it for different reasons. They have different value propositions. They're selling big sponsorships or affiliate links where I'm kind of doing things a little bit different as well. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to figure out what works best for you and kind of own that direction.
And I think that also comes into play with, of course, what your business is. So, both of us are personal brands with also established companies, businesses. But then there are small businesses that could also, every business, small business, Fortune 500, enterprise, everybody can benefit from a signature traffic builder. And that's why we're really starting to see brand blogs pop up. It's a major trend for 2018. Also, look at these statistics for podcasts. Their podcasting has become such a great resource for people to connect with the community and establish their authority. And I love to see the rise of the female audience.
And I tell you what, and female-led podcasts, they still need more hosts of like if you look at the stats, I think this is one of those things too that to reach a new audience, you have to do new things, right? And it's one of those weird worlds where now as we see things like I've said this for a while, the more video takes over the internet, which we are seeing, there's no question that's happening. The more we're gonna need other channels to consume where we can multitask, right? Because if we used to only spend 5 minutes watching video online, now we spend an hour. That 55 minutes now that we're taking away from like reading a blog how do we consume that while we're doing something else? And podcasting is the answer because we can do it when we're driving. We can do it when we're working out. We can do it. My routine in the morning is I listen to a podcast when I wake up. And then usually when I'm cooking dinner, I have a podcast on. And weirdly enough, I create a lot of video. I don't consume much video because I am so busy that I actually allow podcasting to be my kind of vehicle for knowledge consumption. And so for people that are out there, I hear this a lot. We're like, well, Brian, you preach video, yet you invest so much in podcasting. And it's one of those things where you have to find what works for you, but also remember people's attention is so hard to capture. And if they're going to be capturing it, doing something that's, a little bit more in this direction, you might be able to focus on something else as well.
Definitely. And I think, the reality of what works for everybody, that's why I say there's no one size fits all. There's no secret formula. The formula is something you personally have to create for your brand, for your business, for your audience, for your goals.
Exactly.
And depending on what that looks like. And here's a variety of different traffic builders that could work for your brand or your business. It doesn't mean you have to choose one. You could do multiple. Brian and I are doing multiple at the same time. It's also a great way to cross promote and direct traffic to all of your channels. And of course, depending on whether you're e-commerce based or content based, that's going to have a lot of say in what traffic builder is going to be right for your brand and for your business. But if you are really dedicated to scaling that online community, increasing that brand awareness and engagement, generating more leads, all these signature traffic builders are lead gen builders, right? All of these people that are coming to your brand and consuming your content and come to you for value are also warm leads. And also priming you for the ability to monetize that signature traffic builder. And that's so many people, Brian, I'm sure you've heard this so many times too, is, a lot of people be like, all right, well, I want to create a Twitter chat like yours, but how do I make money off of it right away? And I think that's what like stops people from doing it, because they think they can't make money on it right away, or that it's going to be too difficult, or they don't know how. And nobody is going to sponsor your traffic builder if there's no audience and engagement. Right, exactly. So, for all of us who are, I call millennial generation also the Insta generation,
yes.
Right? We want everything now, fast, and really yesterday, done.
Where we want it, when we want it, how we want it. That's an on-demand mentality, right? That's our world.
And how I look at it is that, okay, yes, it might take, a year or two to start to monetize, but that journey, you're going to learn so much throughout it. That audience, you're going to continue to build and learn from. You're going to fail at some point. That's ultimately going to be the biggest learning lessons. And it's really going to lead you to that end goal. If you don't start, how can you meet the goal? Right?
Yep. And you have to, and it really does, it happens along the way. I mean, my podcast, FOMO Fans, when I launched it with a 3-number numbering sequence. So it was 001. So right now I'm on episode 052, so 52. But the reason I put 3 number sequences in there, or 3 numbers, is because Michael O'Neill, he has a podcast called Solopreneur Hour. And I asked him, like, hey, what was something that you wished you knew when you launched your podcast? And he was like, I wished I knew that I needed to get to 100 episodes, 3 digits, before I need to think about anything monetizing and going beyond that. And I was like, wow, like you're, established your, and he was like, yeah, because he said like he got to like 50 and he was like, he's going to quit because it wasn't monetizing because it does take all that, work. And so even though I had a monetized podcast, I knew in my head that if I wasn't getting monetization or traffic, I might second guess myself early on. I decided to make this commitment. I even put it out there in my first podcast. I told everybody, like, I'm going to make a commitment to you, my audience, that I'm going to make it to 100 episodes. And I was like, and that's my goal, right? And I think that is so important for so many people because, yes, some people do, create a book out of nowhere and they, get a huge following, or yes, they launch a Twitter chat and all of a sudden a brand comes out to them immediately. But for people that, if you want to build something that's sustainable and something that really can stand out in this crazy digital world, it takes time, it takes resources. And no one really, as much as we want stuff on demand, we don't trust people on demand, right? You have to continually show up. I mean, the amount, I bet you could probably name 400 Twitter chats since you launched yours that have popped up from popular people that were around for a month or two, huge ones, and then all of a sudden disappeared, right? And the fact that you've, I was actually talking about this with Rachel earlier today, like, I love the community you've built and I love the chat you've built, but it's also the respect I have for you sustaining it. And you've changed in your life, you got married, and all these things that you had going on while you were still investing in your community. So when you make an ask of me, I will say yes, because you've made such a dedication to your community. And I think that's a lesson for everybody that's out there, because if you're not willing to be that dedicated for your community, why would your community be dedicated for you?
Oh, that's so wrapped it up in a beautiful red bow. And I think that's just the reality that everybody needs to face, is that, monetization could be in your horizon, but don't start out, hungry for the dollar amongst that first episode, that first Twitter chat, or that first webinar. And I promise you, because I actually, when I started Millennial Talk, Brian, true, honest to God story, statement here. When I started Millennial Talk, it was such a foreign concept that I could never even imagine at that time monetizing a Twitter chat,
right?
Let alone how to go about doing that. And so I truly didn't even have that in my landscape. And about a year into Millennial Talk was when a brand came to me and said, I see this Millennial Talk situation happening. Do you have sponsors? And that's when I figured out how to make it all happen.
Right.
But it was a year in, and my mission wasn't to monetize, it was to generate traffic and engagement. And traffic and engagement is what leads you to the dollar signs.
Correct. And, and I think that this is a perfect, everything you said in your story, all of those things, you went into that radio station, you sat down, people have to remember, even in a digital world, you need to go into the radio station, you need to meet with a person, you need to keep knocking on that door. And for me, I was the same way. I knew that if I could create great content, build a great community, brands would figure out, or like my number one generator for my speaking gigs is my community pitching their bosses to bring me to speak to them. Like that's my number. And that's because I got people to build it around my community. They go to my content, they give me my organic reach, but they're also my salespeople. They're my advocates. They're my influencers. And to me, that's the true magic, right? And if you can make that happen, it doesn't matter if you're a small business, any size brand, or if you're a personal brand or you're an entrepreneur, it's that ability to invest in them to a point where when you are ready to monetize or they're ready to monetize you, it'll happen in a way that you can't even, like you said, you can't even picture it when you start the thing, but It's amazing when it happens.
Totally. And, so one of my last questions for you, because you can't help but think of it when you look at these statistics, is for people who are potentially interested in getting back into the podcast game. I'm starting back up my podcast very soon, 2018. And I was doing the Chelsea Krost show forever. And I'm officially launching a podcast that's not the Chelsea Krost Show. It's Verified Hustlers. Nice. And it's going to be an awesome podcast. I'm very excited about it. But I couldn't help but think of it myself when looking at these statistics is it an oversaturated market? And if it is a bit saturated, what can you do to ultimately set yourself apart from the competition?
So I think that for me, this was what born the way that I do my podcast is podcasting. There's a lot of people that the podcasting community itself is saturated, but there's not a lot of people that listen to podcasts, right? If you think about it, like as a whole, like the average podcast power listener listens to 7 different podcasts, but the average podcast doesn't make it to episode 5 because people give up, right? So like there's this realm up there. So one of the things that I figured out was I want to reach a new community on podcasting, but I think a lot of people that I was trying to reach either didn't understand podcasting, used to be a podcast consumer, but might not be it now. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to bring them my content where they're at today and almost inspire them to become a podcast listener. So I live stream my show every Monday at 4 on my Facebook page. I then syndicate the video on C-Suite TV, Jeffrey Haslett's network. And all of that, people are like, wait a second, that's a podcast, Brian. Like, you're going to lose downloads. And I was like, no, I don't care about download numbers. I care about total people that I could possibly reach and become subscribers, right? And one of my biggest stats that I preach is repeat viewership or repeat subscription, right? If someone can come back to watch something of yours twice in a row, that's magic. And think about that. 30 minutes of their day, they spent in 1 week. They spent 30 minutes, and the next week, it's like your Twitter chat, right? When I see the same people show up for a Twitter chat, it warms your heart, right? Because you know that they made a commitment to you. And I think the weird thing with podcasting is we have to the reason that the women demographic is really low is because there were so few podcasts tailored towards women, or even more so, not tailored towards women, just hosted by women, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so when and this is the coolest part about podcasting, it's the most intimate content that exists. And the reason I say that is because on video, when we're on video, you're listening to us, but we've painted the picture for you. In podcasting, when I tell a story, it allows you to add your own interpretation of that story because I'm in your ear, I'm walking, like your story, when I, listening to your journey and picturing you walking into a radio studio, if I don't see that picture of you, which is adorable, like young 16-year-old Chelsea, but if you don't see that picture, you now have your own, painting your own view of that, right? And podcasting is so intimate in that reason that the listeners are passionate. I mean, there's no more, I love all of my community, but when I tell my podcasting community, go tweet on this hashtag, go do this, it's amazing. They run and do it because it's such an intimate conversation. And so I do believe there are a lot of podcasts. I believe it's hard if you were looking at a podcast and say, how do I stand out in the podcasting community? I don't have the answer. But what I have the answer for is how do I create a podcast that's so valuable that I can get it to my community wherever they're at and then inspire them to come subscribe and download? That's what I've done. I mean, my Instagram stories drives subscriptions on my podcast. My LinkedIn video right now, this month, LinkedIn video is my #1 driver for people subscribing to my podcast. Think about that. LinkedIn video, that's not, like, no one would have ever told you that. But if you think about it, like your stat that has it right here, right? affluent people with average household income, that 30% have grad, school degrees, advanced, maybe their only social network during the week is LinkedIn. So all of a sudden now I'm putting a 10-minute clip of my podcast in a video form on LinkedIn. And they're like, oh my goodness, I do have a podcasting app on my phone. Like click podcast, and now they're a subscriber, right? And I think when you look at it, the numbers can be out. And I joke with John Lee Dumas and Pat Flynn all the time. With Pat Flynn, last time I saw him, I looked at him, I said, I need an easy button, man. Like my podcast, like if you look at like iTunes search, I'm so far down. But if you look at my community of people that are coming to podcast, and maybe the only podcast they listen to is mine, that is gold. I couldn't cash in anywhere else. So that's kind of my recommendation to it. I also remember connected cars are growing, and the ability for this shared economy, right? Right now, Spotify, when you get into an Uber and Lyft, you can turn it on. Well, podcasting is going to do the same thing, right? You're going to be able to get into a shared car. Your favorite podcast you can play on your, in the Uber, in the Lyft. And so podcasting, as much as it's kind of crazy saturated with podcast itself, I think the listenership is going to grow leaps and bounds in 2018.
I think so too. And I think it's so exciting to be in this time right now, because I think about us 6 years ago and what we know now versus then, and the access that we have to understanding our community now versus then really is such a, it's so advantageous to scaling your community if you're really just starting compared to how we had to do it.
And I think today, like the thing that I'm most excited about is people that are doing good things for the community, that are genuine people, are going to stand out today, because we have, and I think for the last 9 years, we've used social to distance ourselves from our community. We've, hey, go to our website. We've kind of, but now like the reason live video is important, the reason Twitter chats are so valuable, the reason, people always say, Brian, what's the one thing that you credit for your personal brand? I'm like, Twitter chats, no question asked. Like it's not even a hesitation. You're the same way. And when you said that, I was laughing, because what it meant was that we cared about others. We were giving and receiving, right? Like every Twitter chat, I end up writing a note of learning something. I end up like, ooh, that's a new person to follow, or that's a new website to, connect with. But I think the element that we're living in today, digital is going to start to the good people, the good content, and good is always, it's different for everyone, but good is going to start drowning out the noise and the bad. And I think it's the greatest time for that, right? Radio, you could just be a radio DJ for the longest time, and you just, you were on NPR and you had a following, and you just sat around, no matter if you were, good at what you did or the content was good, you had sponsorships. Well, now it's like, well, how many people can you turn into action, and how many people do you inspire? And so I really do think we're living in a time that the good people, the good content, the good stories are going to drown out the bad. And that's going to be the exciting part in the future of digital.
I'm so excited that you think that, because I haven't really put much thought into that going into 2018, but that was such a trend, over the past several years, of just the people making the most outlandish videos or content, like just trying to like get reactions out of people. It's like, okay, ultimately there was really no value given. So it's great to really focus on the people who are providing meat and value and insight, and really care about their community and quality, and care about also the connecting of their community. I'm always about making sure that this person met this person and this person, because that builds out the digital ecosystem that ultimately really does work for you in the long run. And speaking of traffic builder, Facebook groups are such a great opportunity to really create that bubble of a community that you could really grow and have great engagement on. This Verified Hustlers is a very new group for me, and it will be a lot of where I post exclusive content from my upcoming podcast. Brian, thank you for doing overtime with me. We could talk all day.
We could. We're good at that.
But, hopefully we painted the picture of, okay, it's not a quick fix. It's a long-term play. And if you're going to pick your signature traffic builder, think about it in the long term. Is it going to be 5 episodes and then you're going to quit? Or, so it's also do something that you're passionate about.
Yes.
Like, That's why I have 200 guest contributors on my blog, because I don't like to blog, but I want to provide great, valuable content. So, the blogs that I have in there every now and then are great, but at least I'm building that community within my blog. So, think about how you can also outsource and collaborate with additional people in your industry or not within your industry that could bring a unique perspective. So there's so many benefits to really, committing and choosing a traffic builder for you, ultimately to grow traffic, engagement, sales, leads, revenue. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Brian. It's always such a pleasure.
Always
enjoy it. If there's any questions, pop them into the chat real quick. I know we definitely are 20 minutes over time. And also, for any additional questions, you know how to find me and Brian. We're all over social media. We're happy to answer any DMs or tweets you might have our way. But ultimately, thank you so much and have a great evening, everybody.
You too. Cheers.